Hello, I'm Sally Pointer. Now, we've been having a lot of very wintry weather recently. We had snow yesterday, torrential rain overnight today, a hard frost the day before that. So it's definitely a time of year to be sorting things out inside and working on projects. If you're anything like me, you're starting to accumulate quite a lot of handmade needles. Here's some I made earlier. And you get to a point where you start wondering how on earth you're going to store them safely, particularly if you want to take them out and about to work on and do projects when you're out demonstrating or hedge bothering or sitting with friends or whatever. Now, a piece of cloth is what a lot of us end up with, but is there a better way? Well, there is. And today I'm going to be making myself some needle cases which are inspired by evidence that we can trace right back into the Paleolithic. I'm just going to highlight a couple of bits of evidence. This one is particularly interesting because it is the oldest needle case that we currently know about. I just need to fast forward to here. There it is. This is the oldest needle case currently known to have survived. It's made of the middle section of a long bone. It's not very long, as you can see. It's about 5 or 6 centimetres long. It's been broken, so it would have been a little bit longer originally. And it's 37,000 years old. It was found in a cave with things like needle fragments, points that could have been awls, beads, decoration, very much part of the Stone Age sewing kit. Now, what I think is particularly fascinating about it is look at that decoration. Doesn't that look like plaited plant fibre type thing to you, rather than just something leathery? There's so much that we assume about the purposes of Stone Age sewing needles, which may not be the case at all. I'll put a link to this paper in the introduction, in the notes for the video, so that if you want to follow this up, you can do. It's a really interesting site. Now, we could make this needle case in bone. This is a lamb bone rescued from a roast dinner a little while ago. That would make a great needle case. Or this one is a piece of goose bone left over from Christmas dinner. That's a really nice option for a Stone Age one. But I do appreciate that an awful lot of you don't have access to bones in quite the same way that I do. So we're going to go out and we're going to find some wooden alternatives that are going to work just as well and may well fit into that idea of the missing perishable majority that so much archaeology falls into, things that probably existed but have long since vanished. When the sapper's town is a great time to go along the hedges looking for wood to make a needle case from. Now, if you're not that familiar with trees in winter, it may take a little bit of doing to recognise different ones, but this is a good option. This is elder. Now, the easiest way to get to know your elder trees is to spot where the elder flowers are in the spring and the elderberries are in autumn. But also, it has this gnarly main trunk, quite pale wood, but the more recent shoots are fairly smooth. I've cut a bit off this one already, and can you see that the middle has a pith in it? That pith is really spongy, and I've poked this one out completely with a sharp stick while I was walking. That's 9/10 the way of being a needle case. I'll set up another one. I brought a branch home with me. So a piece about the thickness of your thumb, or thereabouts. A little bit thicker would be fine, but not much thinner than that. Find a fairly straight bit that will make a good needle case, and probably make it a tiny bit longer than you want, because then if there's any cracking as it dries, we can resolve that later. Once you've cut your piece, we can take out that pith. Now, do it quite gently. It's quite soft, but it will compact towards the middle, and also it's quite easy if you're too rough to break this outer edge. So flick out the bits you can flick out. And then start wiggling towards the middle. Do it from both ends. I'm using a chopstick at the moment, something like a knitting needle would work well. If I'm walking, I just take a small twig from a nice firm bit of wood. there's often a point where you think it's stuck. I can't possibly be getting anywhere. If we look how far down we are there, and we look how far down we are there, you are pretty much through. It's just now a case of squashing and removing that spongy pith. As it dries up a little bit as well, once you've got that basic hole in, you can keep refining this. Just get that first little bit through, just so that you know you've got a hole all the way. Once you've got a fairly reasonable tube, that one, you see all the way through that one? Yeah, you can see all the way through that one. We can decorate it. You can leave it to dry with the bark on, that's absolutely fine, and in a lot of ways that's going to be the strongest, but you can also remove some of the bark to make patterns. So I'm just going to very lightly score around, not too deep. Remember, this elderwood isn't very thick, and just strip the bark off. I'm going to leave a section of bark on this one and see what happens. Let's just score the bark at the other end. It's a very light touch. The most energetic bit of making this is actually getting the pith out of the middle. Right, now you can see at the end of this one where there's a little bit of cracking. I'm not going to sort that out yet. I'm going to let this dry for a day or two before I finish this, because then any cracking will be at the ends, not in the section that I want. So I've got one slightly decorated one, I've got one plain one that I'm still removing the pith from. That will come out. It's amazing once it starts going how much will just fall away. Do be careful around sharp tools. You can see the hedge bit me. That wasn't my knife, that was actually the hedge. Of course, do collect responsibly. Around me, the hedges get cut back very firmly every winter, and it's very easy to find a section that's due for cutting where I can take a little bit without doing any damage. But if in doubt, check who owns the hedge and ask permission. Okay, we'll let this dry for a day or so, and then I will come back and we will finish our needle cases once we've got to that point. If you can't get elder, wild rose, which you can often still identify by clinging rose hips and even the first leaves coming through, well, that often has a pithy middle as well. You could give that a try. Also bramble. Bramble has a pithy middle. These have had 2 days to dry now. They really haven't cracked much, but there are a few little splinters at the edges where I didn't do a very good job with my initial sawing. There's a little flake out there. Now at this point, if your tubes aren't completely clear, you can refine them. And if you want to use something modern, you can use a round rasp or file. And because everything's dry, just a very few strokes will tidy up the inside really, really nicely. So that's very easy to do. You don't have to do that though. You can just continue with a sharp stick if it's not quite where you want it to be. And then, if necessary, tidy up those edges. This is just the first saw in the workshop that came to hand. Other saws are available. And again, you can use a rasp or file just to perfect that if necessary. Right, now that's all very well and good. Here are some needles, but if I just drop them in, of course, they fall all the way through. And most of the surviving needle cases in archaeology are now just hollow tubes. So what's going on with them? Well, there are two options. This is a needle case that a friend made me. It's very beautiful. This one was made from a drilled piece of wood, but it could just as easily have been a hollowed pith piece. This one uses a wooden plug in the bottom and a carved wooden stopper in the top. That's great. Really, really works. I use this one a lot and I love it to pieces. But we do have evidence from some needle cases from slightly more recently in time, so ones from the medieval period and later, that could give us an idea of what's going on in prehistory. And they rely on a scrap of leather. Could have been cloth, but leather I think grips really well. This is quite easily cut using a flint blade, but by all means use scissors. Now, I could just feed this into my tube, and usually with a bit of a wriggle, it'll go in quite nicely. There we are, comes out the end. And the idea is that you'll pull it into place. Now that will now grip my needles a little bit better, but there's still a chance. Actually, that's pretty good. I was half expecting those to fall out. There is still a chance they could fall out. So there's something else that you can do to limit that possibility. Work out where your needles are going to sit. Get a sense of how much overlap you need. It's a bit of an arbitrary thing. And then take a scrap of your sewing thread, could be sinew, and wrap the top. Now you don't even have to tie this off because this could be a little bit of emergency thread. This is a slightly waxed bit of linen in this case, so it will pretty much stick to itself. Now your needles should stick to that and be a little bit more secure. So now when this is threaded into our case, I haven't tidied this particular stick up yet, but I'll do that in a moment. You don't have to thread through every single time. So really once we've got it going, there we are. So now that pulls up really nicely. If we put a split in the top here, that needs a little bit more. There we are. That can now be hung on a belt or attached to my sewing kit. You've got enough at the bottom to grab when you need a needle, so you just pull that into play, take out your needle, use your needle. If you need emergency thread, you've got it. When the needle needs to go away, there we are, slide it back into place. Job done. We're fairly sure this is how some of those bone and presumably wooden tubes worked in the distant past. So I'm just going to tidy these up. I'm going to finish sawing off the ends. I'm going to fit, wherever I put it, I'm going to fit this one with its leather, and I might do some decoration on this, and we'll have a couple of new needle cases to keep my beautiful precious needles lovely and safe. And we're continuing a tradition that we think we can trace right back into the Paleolithic. I mentioned that persistence of tradition may give us clues as to what's going on. So I'm just going to very quickly show you one more paper. This is in Russian. When I first read it, I used Google Translate and that worked absolutely fine. And this talks about a site that has a Neolithic needle case. In fact, it has several. This one was found with its needles, but also at the same site, there is a medieval needle case that has a leather strap still inside it, and I think, can you actually see that? I think it shows some of the wrapping that we've just experimented with. This persistence of cultural tradition does give us a very strong indication that these types of needle cases have been in use for a very long time. The first one we saw in the first paper was Paleolithic. This one's from the Neolithic, and this one is from the medieval period. And it's those parts of evidence that I've based my interpretation on today. Again, I'll put links and the English title of the paper in the notes for the video if you want to follow this up. Both of them are available on Academia, so aren't behind a paywall. And here are my finished needle cases. I'm really happy with these. They're simple, but they're so effective, and they genuinely do seem to be something that works across a huge period of time. You can use bone, or you can go and find a friendly stick with a pithy middle. And you know what? If you can't get a stick like this, try making one out of a section of bamboo. That's really easy to get hold of. Just go into the garden centre and get a little bamboo stick. The principle will be exactly the same. And all your beautiful handmade needles will be safe, secure, and they're not going to get accidentally broken in your sewing bag. That's it for this particular video. I've got lots more planned for this year. In the meantime, there's about 100 or more videos currently on my site, so do have a rummage around. You might find other things that inspire you. Happy crafting. I will see you in the next video. Bye for now.